All right, welcome back. My name is Derek Main, and I review translated literature. So, today, I'm going to review Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, translated by Ginny Tapley Takemori, and it is by Grove Press, was the publisher. Now, this was apparently an insanely popular book. When I went to my local bookstore, which is Quail Ridge Books in Raleigh, I live outside of Raleigh, and there's 3 independent bookstores. I'm super lucky that I love. Flyleaf in Chapel Hill, one of my favorites. They added a used section about a year ago that is just tremendous. Regulator in Durham, and then Quail Ridge in Raleigh. When I went there, this was on like their display shelf of new and noteworthy. It says on here, has sold millions. I've heard about it quite a lot, so I've been really excited to read it. And before I get into the review, because it kind of connects with this book, a lot of times I get questions from people that know I read a lot about why it is that I focus on translated literature. People would just kind of say, so anything that's in another language and then translated, like that doesn't seem like a genre. And there's a couple reasons for this I'll get into briefly that kind of fold into why a book like Convenience Store Woman is sort of the perfect book for me to read. First off, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I think like a lot of sort of straight white middle American men, I read the kinds of things that are sort of angsty, existential crisis for the straight white middle class man. So Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, of course, Fans Notes by Exley. And I'm not disparaging any of those books, just like I would never disparage like any sort of music or any bit of culture that I've liked throughout the periods. But what I came to kind of find out as I got older is that if I was looking for sort of a take on what it's like to be me, well, I live with myself constantly, and I'm constantly in my own thoughts and in my own culture and country and city. I just find it more of an adventure to go someplace else, to sit out on the front porch or on the couch and to be truly transported. And a lot of times with the sort of literary fiction that is written by men in America, especially that period, I would say, of sort of the 60s, 70s, I don't know if postmodernism or whatever, Carver, that kind of thing. I know what it's like to feel the sense of impending dread that exists living in a cul-de-sac in America. And so I want to feel and see and experience other things. So that's one big reason. Another thing is that the type of presses that generally are putting out translated literature are a little more focused on the experimental and the avant-garde, which is my personal preference of things that I've just come to love to read. So I just think that you find a little bit more of that, frankly, coming from other places, and maybe that's publisher's choice about what sells or whatever, but that's just the reality that I kind of see. So those are sort of 2 reasons. So that leads us into why this is a perfect type of book for me to read, because this book is about a middle-aged woman in Japan who works at a convenience store. And that is a reality that I know nothing about. So I was excited. I was especially excited because there was so much buzz and hype around this book. You do not often see, just for example, like BuzzFeed write-ups, in the beginning of translated fiction. And that is something that we have here. So, disappointingly, I did not love the book. Let me explain so that you can understand that the way that I feel about books that I don't love is that they are just not for me. This is a very well-written book. This is well-conceived. There's nothing wrong with it. So I'll explain sort of the story and then why I didn't love it. So as I said, she works in a convenience store. And her whole life is the convenience store, right? And I mean that really literally. Like, she eats and sleeps solely because a manager once told her that she needs to get good sleep and needs to eat to be fit to work at this convenience store. So everything that she does and everything that she is exists to be sort of a cog in the machine of the convenience store. And so she has a very bizarre personality. I think we would call it maybe socially autistic or something. You know, she has to ask her sister things like how to talk to people, how to answer questions, how to look with her expressions. She copies other people's expressions and ways of speaking so that she can appear normal, because she understands that society wants her to be normal, but she doesn't know innately what that means or how that is to be. And so that's an appealing concept, because I think we all have that to some extent. I mean, it's not normal to record videos and put them on YouTube for 30 people to see that you love translated literature, but it's something I enjoy doing, you know, and something I get joy out of. So I think everyone's got things that are not normal, and that part is sort of appealing as a reader to get into that head. But this character goes so far to the extreme in her inability to function within the world that actually the book that I kept thinking of as I read it, not comparing the titles, but the book I kept thinking of was actually Camus' The Stranger. Because I thought, you know, we didn't have back then a language of sort of socially autistic or Asperger's or these sort of mental health conditions that we now have to sort of understand people perhaps on the fringes of society and culture that have, you know, true and real issues when it comes to assimilation. And I wondered what that book would be like today if that came out, if we would instead think of it more as a book exploring the mental health of this one person. As it stands, Camus' The Stranger is a novel in service of a philosophy, right? The purpose of the novel is to espouse a philosophy, and so is the purpose of the character. I don't think the same thing can be said for Convenience Store Woman. There is a philosophy within it that the main character and the secondary character, primarily the secondary character, certainly espouse. And the philosophy is more of a rejection of modernity, but also it goes all the way back to sort of a rejection of humanity. You know, the secondary character talks a lot about how it was in the Stone Age, how men and women got together and nothing has changed. And I think there's just sort of a general dislike with the character, the secondary character, of the way that people are and the way that we set up our societies forever. I didn't find that particularly appealing because it didn't have anything really interesting to say about it. It just sort of said it exists, and certainly it does exist. And we did get some insight into how two people who are so on the fringes of society might deal with those struggles. But it left me lacking because there was no depth to it. There was kind of one idea, and the idea runs throughout. It's a very slim, book. I think it took me 2 hours to read. Honestly, I've spent 3 days kind of thinking about how to talk about it. And I would say that's not necessarily a credit to the book. That's because I knew I wanted to do a video on it. And I wanted to be respectful and also kind of give my honest opinion. And that is difficult to do sometimes because I'm a caustic person. But there's just sort of one thing, and it doesn't really have any, you turn the page because you kind of want to know what happens with the character and the situations, but then the things that happen are fairly predictable. I mean, honestly, within the first 20 pages, I had a fairly good idea, what the steps were going to be, where we were going to end up, and there's a lot of quotes on here about how unsettling and shocking it is, and I just personally disagree. I didn't find it to be either of those things. I thought this would have been a really, really nice short story, maybe 15 pages or so there, where we could have just gotten into this person's head. And I think that a lot of times is the purpose of great short stories, is things that don't necessarily need to be fleshed out. And I'm not sure that this does need to be fleshed out. And again, it's slim, so for many people, if you're interested in that kind of outsider mentality and how they would sort of function in this world, I think that you maybe could find some joy in reading it. I mean, it's definitely a fun, easy read, but it's not something that really grabbed me in any way. And unfortunately, I have to say that I did not love this book. So that is all for today in Convenience Store Woman. Next up, the next book that I'm going to do is by one of my favorite current authors, but also I'm going to admit kind of a guilty pleasure because I just talked about something being a little one note, and this author, as brilliant as he is, a little one note, but it is the latest in English from Enrique Villa-Matas. It is Mac's Problem, translated by Margaret Jill Costa and Sophie Hughes, and this is New Directions. I think New Directions puts out all of his English language stuff. So this is one of the finest novelists, I think, in the Nobel Prize for Literature, which comes out on Friday. I think he's got like a 50-1 or something. Someone I love even more, actually, Cesar Aria, has like a 25-1, which would be incredible if that happened. But anyway, why am I caring about awards? So we're going to talk about Mac's Problem, and probably more so Enrique Villa-Matas in total, because one novel, I'll just spoiler alert, is kind of a stand-in for all the others. There is not a lot of variance, in my opinion, on subject matter. But again, he's one of my favorites, guilty pleasure, and I'm excited to talk about it. All right, be good to each other.